all have our Christmas pageants. And they said, yeah, we don't have anybody to do that. So I said, I'll do it. So anyway, I arranged the Christmas pageant that year, and from that I developed a theater group for youth through the church, which grew to about 22 kids over 7 years. We did 25 productions, and I wrote half of them, including 3 one-act, 45-minute one-act plays that were my original plays. And yeah, so then I was starting, I guess, to gain a little bit of momentum with regards to the empowerment you can get from, because I've always had something on the go creatively, and I started to gain a little bit of momentum in terms of the power of creating from a written form that didn't have all of the production that goes into film and stage, because there's just so much to it. And then you have to rely on somebody else to get your words out, right, through actors and through your setting and through pacing and through your whole production that way. And so I was, I guess in the back of my mind, I had just started to kind of jot down little bits and pieces of stories. And I was involved in an email exchange with a couple of friends one day. And they started talking about the film P.S. I Love You with Jerry Butler and Hilary Swank. And they were talking about the how romantic it was, how they'd met on an old Irish country road, yada, yada. Anyway, I started writing this scene. And I would keep flipping it. I'd write a couple of paragraphs and I'd email it to them. And they would keep coming back saying, okay, where's the rest of it? After about a week and a half of that, one of the friends said, okay, so you have all of this retained in a Word document somewhere, correct? And I said, yeah, no. She said, okay, I need you to go do that. Anyway, that was the first scenes of Bound to the Highlander, which I completed, wrote, rewrote, was published in 2013. It was an award winner the week before it was published. It's been a #1 bestseller on Amazon category lists in Australia, the UK, the US, and Canada. So just because you think you might be just fooling around, sometimes with the right kind of encouragement and a little bit of faith in yourself, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, that's my writing story.
Yeah, well, it's a good one because you do get a lot of people that, they grow up and they kind of know, and they write all their lives, and they kind of know this is what they want to do, and they go to university and they study it and they do all these, and you think, well, I guess that's the path, right? And then,
yeah.
Not for me. I went into a completely different path, even though I did write when I was younger. I was always writing in some fashion, but writing in some fashion and actually being able to craft a book or a story, in some way that is, professional and, put together well and fit to put out there to the public is a whole other thing. I mean, people say everybody has a book in them, and I'm thinking everybody has a story in them. But
yeah, and a story, and that's exactly correct, because there's so many mediums for storytelling, and I think you have to be. I'm pretty open to my creative side. Whatever direction that steers me, I kind of go with it, and I'm fearless in that way. It was really interesting because I had read a lot of romance in my teens and maybe late teens, around 20-ish. In my 20s, I read Stephen King. I was into horror and science fiction. In my 30s, I read literary fiction. So in my 40s, when I started writing, I was as shocked as anybody that what actually emerged was historical romance, which goes right back to the first, I guess, adult-style novels that I would have read, which was around 13, 14, was the very first romance novel I ever read was historical Scottish romance. And that's what I'm writing. And I've now written, I don't know, 10, 12 books. I don't even know anymore. And it's funny because those are still the stories that continue to emerge. So you don't know, and I think you can't lock yourself down to any kind of expectation. You just got to let your creativity out, which is why I absolutely am the two kinds of writers. As you know, I've definitely talked about this before. The two types of writers are considered pantsers and plotters. Plotters, obvious, they're plotters. They outline. They like to know their chapter structure. They like to know their character arcs, their story arcs, etc., before they ever put pen to paper. Fantastic. I think that's a wonderful way to do it. However, that makes me want to gouge my own eyeballs out. I'd never write another word. I sit down to my laptop and I have no idea what's going to happen. And the cool part of that for my process is that when stuff happens, I'm shocked. I'm looking at this going, I can't believe that just happened. Oh my God, like wow. What am I going to do now? I have no idea. I'm just going to keep typing and see where this goes. It means for a lot of edits in the second draft, but it's just so exhilarating, and that's the part of the creative side of writing that I find completely energizes me. It's not work. It's not a task. It might be a task when you get to the editing side of it, but when it comes to actually getting the words out and getting the story out and being excited about your story, because the bottom line is, if you're not the biggest fan of your story, why would anybody else want to read it? If you don't absolutely adore this story, why should anyone else?
And
right?
How can you sell it, right? If you don't believe in the product, how can you market it and
you
sell it?
You have to be your story's number one fan.
Right. And it's interesting because you mentioned the plotter versus pantser. And for me, I have a character. I start with a character, and I know my book's going to be around 65,000 words. That's my comfort level. My first book was a lot longer. I found it like daunting to think about writing that much, so I write shorter books, and they probably end up around 55,000 when I'm done.
Right.
55 to that's my comfort. So I say 60. So I know that I have to, around chapter 3 or 4, I have to do certain things, and around 5 or 6 I have to do, and I know I have to have plot points, and I have to have some conflict, and I have to have some, minor resolution, and then move on to the next thing. I know this in my head. I don't have to outline it, although what I do is I set up a document. I put in chapters 1 to 30. I put in at each chapter point, something should happen here that's a conflict. And then something should happen here that resolves it. Only so I don't get bogged down in the middle. And
I find around 2/3 of the way through, after riding this high, I go, okay, I need to know what my plot points are, and I'll usually apply the Blake Snyder the Blake Snyder beat sheet. And at that point, I realized, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing, because I let my subconscious take over so much, and then I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And it was interesting because I started to go through that the other day with my current work in progress, and then I realized, okay, so why am I doing this? Why do I have that there? And then I came up with the entire theme and realized how everything connected, and I was blown away. I didn't know I was doing it at the time. It's all in the subconscious.
It really is for me too.
And I love that. That's what makes me excited about a story, is when all of these extra things are there. They're there instinctively. Yeah. And because I've read tremendous amount, and I know what I like as a reader, and so every time I start a new chapter, introduce a new character, it's going to be something that would excite me as a reader. And if I can satisfy my inner reader, who's pretty picky, then I can definitely carry forward as a writer.
Yeah, and I love when those things happen. Like I remember, I have a book coming out next month, and it's been a long project. And there was a scene that I wrote. There was a character in there that was really kind of you're not really supposed to like. It was a bit of an asshole, right?
Right.
He's but not a total jerk, but just not the most likable character. And he was kind of a minor character and everything. And I was writing. Something, and all of a sudden it was like I wrote this scene, and when it was done, it was like I don't even know where it came from. I can't even identify it. It was like it just, if you talk about the muse taking over, I was not in control of it. And when I finished, I went.
No, exactly.
And so since I look at that scene and go, wow. And what it did was it gave some redemption to that character. It made him a little more human. It created, it was, and it had, it's a whole big pivotal moment actually. But at the time, I had no plan. I don't plan these things. I kind of know the character's going on a journey, and that's about it. And when this happened, and so the people that have read the book, like I've, it's been gone out to some readers, and it's, obviously went to an editor, and it's gone to the publisher, and so a lot of people have looked at it, and almost everybody mentions that scene and says, I really like that scene where, like it really changed how you thought, like you gave that character an arc where he didn't need one. He was kind of a minor character.
Exactly.
But if I left it, nobody would have really cared because nobody cared. But it set up his humanity just a little bit more and gave the main character a little something else. And it became this pivotal thing that just came out of the air. It was like magic.
Yes.
And that is the best part of writing, because a lot of it is, it's work. It's just work.
Oh, it is a lot of work, but it's not work if you're enjoying it, and that follows through. When you're passionate about your characters and your story, that really shines through with with readers. They often contact me and talk about the detail that I've put into some of the settings, and I'll explain that I've visited them all. I've done 2 research trips to Scotland. I've visited everywhere I've written about, except for one place. And I've smelled the air. I've tasted the food. I've met the people. All of that is. It's not. You don't have to rely on your imagination as such when you've actually visited the place. But there's something really special about having written a story set in a place and then visited it after the fact. That was a little overwhelming for me when I visited Aileen Donan Castle in the West Highlands, and I stepped into the chamber. They have on the website for that castle, they have a virtual tour. So I had done the virtual tour. I knew how to describe the room, but when I stepped into that room myself, and my character just came alive for me in there. It was rather overwhelming. It's a difficult thing to explain. And then the same thing happened to me with the second book. I had set it in the far north of Scotland in a village called Tongue. And there's a castle ruin up there called Castle Varick. And I had set, several scenes up there. So I visited there on my second trip. And once I hiked up and got to the top, I couldn't speak. It was overwhelming because I'm now where I had set the characters. And it's just, so both times when I went home, I was able to add something else to those stories before they were published. I was really fortunate that way. But but going back to what you were just saying, I killed off a character in book 5 in the series, and I grappled with that for days and days. And when I wrote the scene, I screeched the whole time. And I've gotten, I won't say hate mail, but I've gotten some pretty scathing remarks from some fans of the series who don't understand what the big picture is, and how can they, because I haven't written it yet. There's 5 books in the series and 2 novellas, and we're going in a very specific direction, which I have to start doing bad things to people in order to justify what's coming in the end. And so it's good that the fans are invested, but I hate disappointing them, and I was disappointed too. Like, it was really hard for me to have to kill off that character, but it had to happen. And I looked at that once it emerged that was going to happen. I turned that over 14 different ways in my head. How can this go forward without this happening? And there was no way to do it. So sometimes you just have to do the hard thing that has to be done, and anyway. And that's why I say my series is like Game of Thrones meets Outlander, because I'm a little like George R.R. Martin sometimes. It's just like, now, not senselessly, of course, but like, that character's got to die. It's really bad, but sorry, bye, Felicia. You got to go, man. Right?
It's funny because I was in a conversation on another writing group that I was in a conversation about, and the person was just looking for a little plot suggestion or something. It wasn't any big deal. Looking for a motivation for some little thing, and I think it was just it was a very simple thing, like, why would someone do this? Like, what would be a good reason? Which I personally don't ask those questions of writers' groups, because I figure motivation is the thing that I need to come up with myself. But this was a new writer learning, and so you're a little bit, you go a little easier on them. I didn't give them an answer. I led them in that direction. But a lot of the responses were, well, um, a good boss wouldn't do that, or you would never do that because it would lead to all these terrible things.